Look at the lake right now. Not a real lake, necessarily. The one you carry in your head. The image that comes up when someone says the word swan. Still water. White bird. That particular quality of silence that seems to exist only at the edge of water on a calm morning. The whole picture has a quality of remove from ordinary life, as if the lake and the bird on it exist slightly outside the world where difficult things happen. That image is one of the most effective pieces of misdirection in the natural world. Not because it is false. The lake is real. The bird is real. The stillness is real. But the stillness has a source that the image does not show you, and the source is not what the symbol suggests. What you are about to learn happens at every swan lake in the world. It is happening right now, at the lake you pass on your way to work, at the park where families come on weekends to feed the birds, at the reservoir outside town, where the swans have been for as long as anyone can remember. It is happening below the surface of everything you think you know about the most symbolic bird alive. Stay until the end, because the last section covers something documented in field research across 3 continents that the greeting card version of the swan actively requires you not to know. And once you know it, the image changes, not into something worse, into something true. Number 1. What the stillness is actually made of. There is a question worth asking about any animal that presents as serene. What did serenity cost? For a mute swan on established territory, the answer is specific. The calm of a territorial male on his lake in June is the calm of an animal that has already resolved every challenge to its position. The rival male that tested the boundary in April was driven off after an encounter that left one bird bleeding and one bird sovereign. The pair that attempted to nest on the northern end of the territory in March was displaced through a campaign of harassment that lasted 11 days before they gave up and moved to a less defended stretch of water 2 miles away. The juvenile male that appeared in May, drawn by the quality of the habitat, was intercepted at the boundary and given a demonstration of what the boundary means that he will carry in his behavioral memory for the rest of his life. None of this is visible in June. What is visible in June is a large white bird moving across the water with that specific quality of unhurried grace that has made it a symbol for 3,000 years. The grace is real. The unhurried quality is real. But it is the unhurried quality of an animal that has nothing left to prove this season, not because it is peaceful by nature, but because it has already done what was necessary to make the lake peaceful for itself. Researchers who track territorial establishment in mute swans at the beginning of the breeding season document something that looks nothing like the June lake. The same water, the same birds, but a completely different behavioral register. Fast, directed movement, constant boundary monitoring, physical confrontations that begin as display and escalate in the encounters between closely matched rivals, to contact, wing strikes, neck grips. The drowning attempt, not metaphorical, not display. An actual attempt to hold another bird underwater until it stops resisting. The June serenity is downstream of all of that. It is what the territory looks like after the territory has been won. Number 2. The hierarchy that runs beneath the surface, and what it costs the birds at the bottom of it. Every swan lake has a social structure. Most people who visit that lake regularly cannot see it, because the structure is maintained not by constant visible conflict, but by the memory of past conflict that both parties share. The dominant pair on a lake does not need to chase subordinate birds every day. It chased them once or twice, or enough times in the early season that the subordinate birds now self-regulate. They stay in the marginal areas. They feed in the spots that the dominant pair has not claimed. They do not approach the nest. They maintain the distances that the previous encounters established, because they remember what happened when those distances were not maintained. What this looks like to a casual observer is a lake full of birds coexisting peacefully. What it actually is a lake full of birds organized into a dominant structure where most of the enforcement is done by memory rather than by ongoing conflict. The peace is real, but it is not the peace of animals that have no conflict with each other. It is the peace of animals that already know where they stand. The birds at the bottom of this structure, the non-territorial floaters, the immature birds without mates or claimed water, pay a price that is not visible from the path, but that shows up clearly in the data. Higher stress hormone levels, lower body condition, higher mortality rates through winter. The competitive exclusion from the best feeding areas is not trivial. In hard winters, the difference between the feeding access of a territorial bird and the feeding access of a floater can be the difference between surviving to spring and not. The dominant swan on the lake is not neutral about the existence of the floaters. It benefits from the social structure that keeps them marginal. The structure that looks, from the outside, like peaceful coexistence is, from the inside, a system of resource monopolization enforced by the memory of violence and the credible ongoing threat of more. Number 3. The intelligence behind the aggression. This is not an animal running on instinct. What makes mute swan aggression genuinely unsettling to anyone who thinks about it carefully is not the physical capacity. Large birds hit hard. That is not surprising. What is unsettling is the evidence that the aggression is applied with something that functions like judgment. Mute swans remember individual opponents. This is documented, not anecdotal. A male that has encountered a specific rival on multiple occasions responds to that specific rival differently than to a new, unknown intruder. The previous encounter, its outcome, the difficulty of the contest, is factored into the current response. A rival that was easily displaced before is treated differently than a rival whose challenge required significant effort to resolve. The tactical dimension is more specific than simple memory. Territorial males have been observed adjusting the timing and intensity of their responses based on the apparent condition of the intruder. An intruder that arrives showing signs of physical depletion, poor feather condition, low body weight. The signals that indicate a bird that has had a hard winter or a difficult migration receives a different response than a rested, well-conditioned intruder of equivalent size. The territory holder is reading something. It is adjusting its investment in the response based on what it reads. This is assessment. It is the application of something that functions like tactical intelligence to a problem of resource competition. And it is happening in an animal whose primary cultural representation is a symbol of pure, uncalculating beauty. The female is not outside this system. The female's role in territorial defense is less visible because she performs less of the overt display and physical confrontation. But researchers observing breeding pairs during territorial challenges have documented clear coordination between the male and female that goes beyond the male defending while the female sits on the nest. The female communicates. She orients toward threats. She produces specific calls that appear to direct the male's attention. The pair operates as a unit with distributed functions, not as a hero and a bystander. A coordinated defense with individual recognition, tactical adjustment, and interpartner communication is not instinct in any simple sense. It is a social and cognitive system of real sophistication, running inside an animal that most people have never thought about in those terms. Number 4. What the swan does to the rest of the lake, the part nobody talks about. The ecological impact of a territorial mute swan pair on the other species sharing their water is one of the most consistently under-discussed aspects of swan biology. The bird is so visually dominant, so culturally loaded, so much the center of attention at any lake it inhabits, that what it does to everything else tends to pass without comment. The nest destruction is the most direct impact. Mute swans will dismantle the nests of other water birds within their territory. Coots, moorhens, grebes, diving ducks, all of them nest within the same shallow water environments that swans claim as territory. The swan's response to nests built within its territory is not toleration. Documented observations of swans systematically destroying nesting structures, returning to rebuild sites after the displaced birds attempt reconstruction, show a persistence that is difficult to read as anything other than deliberate exclusion. The vegetation impact accumulates over time in ways that most visitors never connect to the bird they are watching. A mute swan pair with cygnets is consuming and uprooting aquatic plants at a rate that can measurably alter the plant community of a smaller lake over the course of a single breeding season. The submerged plant beds that the swan grazes are also the habitat and food source for invertebrates, fish, and the smaller water birds that the swan is simultaneously excluding from its territory. The feeding is not neutral. It reshapes the ecosystem around the swan's requirements at the expense of everything that depends on the resources the swan is consuming. In North America, where mute swans were introduced from Europe and have no evolutionary history in the ecosystem, this impact has attracted enough management attention to generate genuine policy controversy. In the Chesapeake Bay region, mute swan densities in certain areas have been associated with significant degradation of submerged aquatic vegetation that the native waterfowl populations, ducks, geese, native swans, depend on. Management responses have included lethal control programs that have generated public outrage from people who cannot reconcile the symbol of beauty with the reality of ecological displacement. The public outrage is understandable. It is based on a version of the swan that does not include this information. The management reality is based on a different version, one that includes what the bird actually does when you put enough of them in an ecosystem that did not evolve with them. Number 5. The secret inside the pair bond, and what it means for everything the symbol stands for. The mute swan pair bond is real. I have said this in other videos, and I will say it again clearly here, because what follows is not a refutation of the bond. It is a complication of what the bond actually is. Genetic studies of mute swan families, using paternity testing on collected samples from broods at research sites, have found that a proportion of cygnets in any given population are not the offspring of the social male that is raising them. The female mated with another male while maintaining the pair bond. The genetic father and the social father are different birds. The rate in mute swans is lower than in many other bird species. Social monogamy with genetic fidelity is closer to the reality for swans than for, say, reed warblers, where extra-pair paternity rates approach 60% in some populations. But it is not zero. It has been documented across multiple study populations. It is real. What this means is that the male swan raising a brood may be investing 30 years of territorial defense, parental provisioning, and protective aggression in cygnets that do not carry his genes. He does not know this. The behavioral bond is intact. The parental investment is complete and apparently undiminished. The genetic reality and the social reality are running on separate tracks, and the social track does not have access to the genetic information. The female that engaged in extra-pair mating was not, in any moralistic sense, doing something wrong. She was doing what the evolutionary logic of her situation selected for. Extra-pair mating in birds almost always reflects a female's assessment that the extra-pair male offers genetic qualities that her social mate does not. The offspring produced have a broader genetic base. In an uncertain environment, genetic diversity in offspring is a survival hedge. The swan is not betraying the symbol by doing this. The swan was never the symbol. The symbol was a human construction placed over an animal that was simply doing what worked, across millions of years, in an environment that did not reward purity for its own sake. The image is white, the still water, the grace, the apparent serenity of a bird that has resolved its challenges and sits now on the territory it won and defends, watching the water it knows better than any other animal in it. The image is not false, but it is incomplete. The complete version includes the territorial violence that produced the serenity, the social hierarchy that the serenity rests on, the intelligence running behind the grace, the ecological dominance that the beauty conceals, the genetic complexity inside the lifelong bond. The complete version is harder to print on a greeting card, but it is a more accurate picture of what is actually on that lake. And it is, by any measure, more interesting. The animal behind the symbol has been surviving and competing and strategizing and reproducing in difficult environments for millions of years. It did not do that by being innocent. It did that by being exactly what it is, which is not pure, not in any simple sense, but it is something considerably more compelling than purity. It is real. Tell me in the comments, was there something in this that genuinely surprised you? A part of the picture you had not seen before? Tell me which section landed hardest and what it changed about the image you carry. I read every one.